Joe Biden recently has decreased by 11 points just in the month of October alone among Democrat voters. Not exaggerating. I kid you not. I think this is the furthest we've saw him drop in 1 month. And I think we all know why. What has started this month, this war between Israel and Gaza, is obviously having an influence on Democrat voters. And I think this is very interesting given the fact for the past for the past 2 years, myself and those of us at RBN have been talking about this issue with Israel and Palestine. And I cannot tell you the number of times people have told us that this is not an important issue. The number of times that people have told me that American voters don't care about this at all. Well, that was before this war broke out. And now more Americans are paying attention to what's happening in Israel, and Americans are actually concerned, and it is affecting Democrat voters. And I do believe that if Joe Biden does not find a way to fix the way that he has responded to this conflict and fix the way that the U.S. government is funding this conflict, I do believe this could be an upset for Joe Biden come 2024. But you don't have to just hear it from me, folks. I want to get into this clip from News Nation where they are discussing Joe Biden's recent decline among Democrat voters.
Poll finds Democrat support for President Biden has plunged over just the past few weeks. As the Israel-Hamas war has taken center stage, 75% of Democrats now back the president versus 86% just last month. And
pausing here. 86% in September. That was just in September.
And when it comes to voters overall, President Biden's approval dipped to 37%, matching a record low. Let's bring in White House columnist for The Hill, Niall Stanich. Niall, help me break all of this down. Niall, Gallup polling finding the lowest level of support among Democrats since President Biden was elected. The very same poll back in March found Democrat sympathies for Palestinians now outweighs that of Israelis, 49% to 38%, a drastic difference from 2 decades ago when Israel had majority support. Is there a connection to that?
Is there a connection to that? Of course there is. Look at this, guys. Look at the polls. In 2001, 51% of Democrats supported Israel, 16% supported the Palestinians. Now in 2023, 38% of Democrats, their sympathy lies with Israel. 49% of their sympathy lies with the Palestinian people. And this is where we need to give applause to independent journalists. And I say this because had it not been for independent journalists and networks like Al Jazeera, and of course, social media, more so Twitter, because Twitter's been given a pass to a lot of these things, unlike Facebook, I really do believe that most Americans would still be asleep. Because mainstream media has not covered this conflict the way that they should from the get-go. It wasn't until the numerous amounts of protests across the world when mainstream media had to actually respond to the plight of the Palestinian people, the occupation, and the suffering that they've been experiencing for decades. So you have to actually applaud independent journalists like a Abby Martin, like a Max Blumenthal, like a Aaron Mate. You have to applaud people like Norm Finkelstein. You have to applaud people like Cornel West, people like Katie Halper, people who have been correct on this issue for years, not just the month of October. Let's continue.
In this recent drop, or are there other factors in play?
I think it's primarily being driven by exactly the issue you mentioned, Nick. And I think this is a fascinating issue because it's a really clear example of how foreign policy and American domestic policy and politics intersect. What we're seeing over a long period of time is younger, more progressive or left-wing Democrats becoming more sympathetic to the broad Palestinian cause. So it's not only that they have a difference of opinion with President Biden, they view this conflict through a fundamentally different lens. So for President Biden, it's about standing by a US ally, this sort of plucky democracy that is encircled by hostile nations and has suffered a grotesque attack. Progressives don't see it that way at all. They cite things like Israel's decades-long occupation of the West Bank, which has, after all, been held to be illegal under international law, or its long-term treatment of the Palestinians, which, after all, has been condemned by a number of international human rights organizations. So the whole way of looking at this broad conflict is different. And I think it's that schism that is driving the drop in the polling.
And Niall.
And I want to jump in here for a second. He mentions the younger people. The younger people are not being fooled by mainstream media. And I want to compare this to the Vietnam War. What's interesting to me is that some of the people, some of the older Americans who are complaining about the younger people, the Gen Z kids out there protesting in support of the Palestinian people and their right to self-determination. Some of those same people protested against the Vietnam War. Some of those same people protested against the Iraq War. I know I've had conversations with people about this. And sometimes I think as you get older, sometimes I think it can be easy to forget where you were at that point in time. Some of the things that you fought for. Now, with the Vietnam War, it was a little bit easier, right? Because network television actually covered the casualties, the civilian casualties in Vietnam, and that included the children. And when you're sitting at home and you're watching TV and you see kids being victims of this war, innocent children that had nothing to do with this at all, it is bound to tug at your heartstrings in some way, shape, or form. The problem is, since the Vietnam War, mainstream media decided not to cover civilian casualties as it did during that time. So a lot of Americans who were born after the Vietnam War, they didn't see this through all the other wars that we've had throughout the world. In comes independent media. In comes documentaries like Abby Martin's documentary to show you what is happening to people, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And this is why I say you have to applaud independent media. Over the weekend, I have seen multiple videos of children in Gaza, children being injured, children dying on video. And it was really hard to see. It was really hard to see because it was one video after another. And there's no way you can tell me you can't watch those videos and feel some type of way, because these kids didn't sign up for this. And as I've told you before, the majority of people in Gaza are kids. I'm seeing videos of people running from what was their home, just trying to survive in the middle of the night. And we'll get into that story a little bit more as we get into the second to the last story of the show, because I have some things to discuss about that and attach it to the rally that happened in New York City. But there are multiple platforms now. There isn't just a YouTube. There are different social media platforms, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, and Facebook heavily censors, whether it's Instagram, but also TikTok, that is allowing younger people to see what is actually happening to the Palestinian people, but is also explaining the history of the struggle, the occupation, the land grab. And today we're going to get into the resources that is often not being discussed off the coast of Gaza.
That and age. I have noticed a difference just among the people within my circle, both personally and professionally. It seems as though older people are just much more aligned with maybe foreign policy issues of old, and younger just don't feel the same way. We've seen other polls that show many Democrats do not want Mr. Biden to run again, many citing his age. Is the White House still largely shrugging it all off, or have they developed a strategy to hit it head on?
They haven't honestly developed a strategy to really neutralize the age issue, because what can you do? He is the age that he is. sometimes he shows it. Now, there is an argument about experience and being seasoned, and of course, in a situation like the current one overseas, knowing world leaders personally. But the age issue continues to drag the president down. The White House's emphasis is more on selling other elements of his record, particularly his economic record, particularly his record on job creation.
And quickly now, before I run out of time, Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips is expected to announce his primary challenge of the president today in New Hampshire. Could Phillips, his run, become a big problem for the president, even if he doesn't actually win? I know that Phillips is one of the wealthiest members of Congress.
We'll get into that in just a second. So we'll get into the Dean Phillips thing. But one thing I want to add, what he mentioned about Joe Biden's job creation numbers. As I said before, the American people, when they look at their bank account, these job creation numbers don't mean anything if your bank account is struggling, if you don't have savings, if you're having to still work paycheck to paycheck. They still haven't increased the federal minimum wage. All of these items that Democrat politicians have been trying to use to convince people why Joe Biden should be reelected. I want people to understand that none of that matters now since this war. That is what the focus is right now. You can't go one news cycle without seeing something about Israel and Palestine. You just can't. You can't. So this is where the majority of people are focused right now. So if people like Ro Khanna or Pramila Jayapal want to try to continue to brag about this job creation that Joe Biden did, they can forget it. We are now involved in 2 international conflicts under one president who hasn't even made it into the second term. How does this happen? How does this happen? So we're going to slide into the Dean Phillips portion of this story, because it appears that Marianne Williamson is no longer the only Democrat challenger to Joe Biden in 2024. While Marianne Williamson is running on more progressive issues, Dean Phillips is not. Dean Phillips is a middle of the road Democrat. He's more aligned with Joe Biden in reference to policy positions than he is to Marianne Williamson. He calls himself a pro-business Democrat. So now you have another challenger in the race to challenge Joe Biden for the Democrat primary.
That's right. A net worth somewhere between $20 and $70 million. I think his challenge is a problem, not because he can win, but because he is a personification of Democratic discontent with the sitting president. And that's obviously something that can not only foment splits within the Democratic Party, but can provide political ammunition to Republicans who are essentially trying to make the same case.
And now, when you said that age was front and center, I saw a split screen between the two of them, and the difference was definitely jarring. Niall Standish, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Okay, now let's get into Dean Phillips, because recently Dean Phillips had an interview. Pull this up here. Oh, where did it go? Where did it go? There we go. We're going to swap this. Dean Phillips recently had an interview with Meet the Press. Now, I want you to hear this, because, yes, of course, we know they're not going to let Dean Phillips win. They're not going to give him the nomination. And there's no Democrat debate. There's no Democrat primary debate. We're well aware of this. But Dean Phillips is much younger than Joe Biden, seems to be a little bit more coherent. Do I think he's for the working class people in this country? Absolutely not. But this is essentially if Gavin Newsom were to primary Joe Biden. This is essentially what this is. So let's bring in Dean Phillips, and I want you to hear what he has to say about why he's running and where he's going to go from here. Listen to this.
Problem in this country. The people whose job it is to represent the Americans, the American people, the American citizens, are not doing it. They're not listening, because if you go out and listen to people in the streets, in restaurants and in coffee shops, at their places of work, in parks, they're telling every one of us right now that they want change. So when I hear people in Washington say that this is a mistake or this is nuts, That is exactly the evidence that everybody needs watching right now, that something is terribly wrong. We are the exhausted majority of this nonsense, people who are so much more focused on preserving and protecting their power than they are protecting American people. That is the truth. I hear it every day. My colleagues hear it every day. I know you hear it every day too, Kristen. And that's why I'm running. Because in a democracy, when people are asking for change, you stand up, you participate, you don't sit down and shush up. That is the worst we could possibly do for the future of this country. And I will not rest, but I will be respectful. I will not demean the president. I will not undermine him. I will not be dangerous relative to his chances. And whoever the Democratic nominee is, I believe it will be me. But if it is someone else, I promise to do everything I can, every ounce of energy, every moment of my day to ensure that he or she is elected, because that's how important it is right now.
Congressman.
Let's pause here for a second. So this is what I wanted to show you about Dean Phillips. Dean Phillips is establishment. Again, he's identified himself as a pro-business Democrat. But here's Dean Phillips talking about what the people want, what the American people actually need, and their complaints and criticism against Joe Biden's presidency. But at the end of this little speech that he had there, he told you he'll do whatever he can in his power to help the nominee. Where have we heard that before? Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders said that if he didn't win in 2020, I'll do whatever I can to help the Democrat nominee win and defeat Donald Trump. So Dean Phillips is nothing more than a Democrat shill. He's not really here to help the people. He's here to give the people an illusion that there is someone else who is there to help them. Make no mistake. I honestly believe that if Dean Phillips were to win, he would be doing the same things that Joe Biden is doing right now in reference to foreign policy. Is Dean Phillips going to say we are not going to give any more funding to Israel? No. Dean Phillips is going to fit right into that status quo. So essentially, this is Dean just trying to run some type of a vanity campaign. He knows the Democratic Party, the DNC, is actually not going to let him become the nominee. He knows this. He's not new to this. So this is the illusion that there is someone running against Joe Biden for the people. Barack Obama made these same types of statements before, and we realized he was establishment as well. But he's taken advantage of the opportunity that Joe Biden is polling so low right now, and Joe Biden is losing support from Democrat voters. That's important. It's one thing for him to lose support among independents, because independents sometimes can go either way or just sit it all out together, right? But when you're losing support among your own party, that is very concerning. So Dean, in my opinion, is trying to capitalize on that. He'll probably write a book after all this is done.
You are there in New Hampshire right now, actively campaigning, but it's a state that by all accounts won't award delegates. You missed the Nevada filing deadline. It doesn't seem like your campaign is being built to actually win the nomination. Do you have a realistic path? What is it?
Because there you go. There you go. Because he's not doing this to actually win the nomination. You heard what she said. He already missed the Nevada deadline. So we're going into November. There's a couple of states that have deadlines in November and December too, if I remember correctly. But he already missed Nevada. How do you miss that one?
Oh, rest assured, this is a campaign built to win. The difference is that most people who run for president have spent decades preparing for it personally, building organizations, planting the seeds, protecting their positions of power. This is a campaign that was developed in the last 3 weeks because there's an existential threat to the country. President Biden is behind in the national polls. He is behind in 5 of the 6 battleground state polls. His approval ratings are at historic lows. And I hear every day from people right here in New Hampshire and Minnesota, all around the country, the same thing. People want change.
But
that is the truth.
But he's not here to bring you any type of change. That's the thing. He's not here he's just tricking people and making them think that he's going to bring some type of change. I want to answer your question, A.R. Francis. I thought the DNC made a rule that you can't enter New Hampshire to campaign. You can, but you have to pay a fine. You'll be fined for doing so. I'm pretty sure Dean has plenty of money, Pretty sure Dean has corporate donors.
Congressman, let me just
I think we should
challenge
simply
you.
acknowledge that.
Let me just challenge you on that point, because if you can't win delegates in New Hampshire, where you're currently campaigning, you will be behind in the delegate count. Will you not? You're not registered in Nevada. What's the path here, and at what point do you say, okay, I don't have enough delegates, I'm going to drop out and get behind President Biden?
I believe we will win New Hampshire. I will be filing in other states. We are building a grassroots campaign.
What other
in the
states,
most literal
Congressman?
sense.
Where else are you filing?
I'll be I'll be in South Carolina. I'll be in Michigan. I'll be in other states all around the country, because that's how you do this. You stand before the voters to make your case, to listen to them, to hear them, their hopes and their dreams, their fears, and then to identify how we are going to work together to overcome those challenges. It's so fundamental to democracy. I do not understand why people are fearful about choice. Why are people fearful about the freedom to have different options? It makes almost no sense to me. And that, I think, is part of the problem that we're seeing in the country. That's why people are so angry, they're so upset, and that's why 80% of the country wants a different person in the White House.
Congressman, respectfully, if you're not willing to draw bright red lines with the president, how are you going to beat him in this primary?
How am I going to win this? Very simply. American voters. What a novel, unusual concept. Is it the political industrial complex that will decide this next election? Is it the Democratic National Committee that will decide the next election? Yeah, that's how it's been done in the past, and that's exactly why we find ourselves in this very position.
Let me pause him right there. So he's smart to call out the DNC deciding who the primary challenger or who wins the primary challenge, right? But he's not smart enough to not run through the Democratic Party. This is how you know that Dean is just here just to sheep her people into the Democratic Party. You see, if you openly acknowledge that you know that the DNC selects who they want the nominee to be, that the DNC has rigged primary campaigns or primary challenges before, particularly like Bernie Sanders. We talked about the DNC fraud lawsuit on the show multiple times. He's willing to acknowledge all of that, but he's still going to run through the Democratic Party because he knows this campaign isn't going to win. He knows he doesn't have a chance. He knows the game is rigged. This, again, is just someone else giving you the illusion that you have a choice and that they have a chance to beat Joe Biden when they know they do not. Dean is going to spend time raising a lot of money. Notice what he said about the states that he's going to focus on. Obviously, he's in New Hampshire. He mentioned Michigan and he mentioned South Carolina. Now, Michigan is one of those states that can be a swing state, right? Like that's one of the ones that Joe Biden really cannot afford to lose. So it seems like to me, his campaign strategy is going to be to focus on key states, not focus on all 50 states. And some people think that that's a good strategy. But if you're trying to win, this is the thing. If he's trying to win, he would have filed in time so that he could be able to be on the ballot in a state like Nevada, but he did not. This is how I know Dean is not serious. Let me let him finish and we're going to go to some other polls.
I was an outsider for most of my life. I watched this from the outside. I was disgusted, just like so many watching right now. Then I've spent the last 5 years on the inside, every single day paying attention to how this works, how it doesn't work, what needs to change. That's my case to America. If people are willing to take a moment out of their day and go vote in the primary election, I can almost guarantee you that I will win the Democratic nomination and then I will win the U.S. presidency. And then, once again, the American people will come first because it was they that will have made the difference, not the political industrial complex that is going to be working very hard against me because I was not a member of that tribe.
All right. Let's stop that there and then let's look at some polls because I do want to show you what this looks like here. Democrats' rating of Biden slips. Overall approval at 37%. Now, we already went through the details, so I'm not going to read you the article, but I do want to show you these data points here. President Joe Biden's job approval rating September versus October. In September, we're going to focus on Democrats. In September, 86% approval. October, 75%. That's at 11 points that I was telling you about. we'll focus on all of it here. We're not going to focus on Republicans. We know aren't going to vote for Joe Biden. So we'll focus on independents as well. In September, he had 39% among independents. October, he has 35%. U.S. adults, 41% in September, 37% in October. Let's go to another data point. And you can see this here. Over time, you can see how much approval he had from January 2021, going all the way down, going into 2022. He was at 44% August 2022, sliding down, going back up, sliding down. April this year, he was at 37%, going up to June, 43%, down 40%. And now we are all the way here in October, which is 37%. And I believe I have one more to show you here. And you can see President Joe Biden's job approval ratings among partisans. Again, here's that Democrats here, that's 75%. See that drop down. And then we will see the independents, which has always been kind of shaky with Joe Biden. But he actually at one point had 61% of independents. That was January 2021. But he has not been able to get back up there since January 2021. So he's been on shaky ground with independents actually since his entire presidency. And of course, with Republicans, what is really interesting is that at one point with Republicans, he had 12% support. That was July 2021. And now we swing over to October this year and he has 5%. Now, why am I talking about what's happening with the independents and shaky ground? We do have to remember that a state like Arizona, for example, Joe Biden actually got a significant amount of support from registered independent voters. So the fact that Joe Biden is not able to get back up to that 61% among independents, what is going to happen come 2024 when it's time to vote? What will independents do? And I have a prediction here. I have a prediction that some of these independents are not going to vote for Republican or Democrat. I have a feeling that some of these independents are going to vote for third party or independent candidates. Some of them might go over towards RFK Jr., although he's lost some support as well. Some of them may go towards like a Cornel West. Some of them may go towards, there's also Dr. Shiva. Don't forget about that. But I have a feeling that it's not going to be that same amount of support from independents that Joe Biden had before in 2020. And that is concerning. I think that Democrats should be concerned about that. And then I want to show you something else, because also on this episode, they didn't actually, let me go to, they did get into this discussion about Biden's approval. So I do want to go ahead and bring this up as well. Just go a little bit further. And they brought in Simone Sanders. So let's see here. Here we go. This piece right here.
I mean, look at this. 75% of Democrats approve of the president's job. 37%, Matt, say they approve overall, of voters overall. So clearly, at this point in time, and this is a snapshot in time, he does have some vulnerability. How do you anticipate Republicans will try to capitalize on this moment?
Well, they're going to try to point out all the differences in the Democratic Party. They see some of these numbers with Biden dropping under 40% in the latest Gallup poll because of erosion among Democratic voters as a sign of trouble ahead. I will say this, he might not need math to make an impact in this race. 1968, Gene McCarthy didn't even win New Hampshire, but his outsized showing forced LBJ from the race. Phillips may be pursuing a similar strategy.
What about that, Simone? The optics of it, do they start to chip away at the president's support around the edges and, frankly, emboldened the Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump?
Two things can be true at the same time. Dean Phillips has actually no chance of winning the Democratic nomination because of math, and his candidacy is, in fact, troubling for the Biden-Harris reelection campaign because Dean Phillips is going to go out there and he just, I heard him say, I will not demean the president. I won't undermine him. But his entire campaign is essentially an undermining of President Biden and, frankly, an undermining of his policy goals. He said.
Let's pause right here because this is something about these people, okay? What Simone Sanders is telling you is that nobody should primary challenge Joe Biden. That's essentially what she's telling you by doing that, just by simply being in the race. And I told you, I don't agree with Dean. I don't think Dean's telling the truth about himself or about his campaign. I think Dean is a poser. Let's just keep it real. But Simone Sanders doesn't want anyone to challenge Joe Biden. She didn't want Marianne Williamson to do it. And Cornel West, who's been running third party outside of the duopoly since the get-go, she doesn't want him to run either. Essentially, what Simone Sanders wants to happen is she just wants Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be reelected. That's it. She believes that they deserve reelection just simply because they are sitting in the seat right now. It's interesting how Simone Sanders continues to run cover for Joe Biden, considering the fact that Joe Biden didn't even think much of her to make her his press secretary, even though she tackled a protester who charged at Joe Biden. She decided to play bodyguard when he was running the Democrat primary for 2020. And he couldn't even think much of her to say, okay, I'm going to make you my press secretary. No, he chose Jen Psaki. And then after Jen Psaki stepped down, Karine Jean-Pierre came in. So why are you still out there defending Joe Biden, Simone? Because she's on MSNBC.
That the border is one of the reasons why he is running. That is something you often hear from Republican elected officials, Republicans who are running to be president of the United States of America. And I think that's language that could be parroted by some Republican opponents. And then secondarily, I guess thirdly, I would note, it just reminds people, and frankly, I think it is he has the right to run, but I think it's giving people a false sense of hope that somehow maybe Joe Biden won't be the Democratic nominee and we can have someone else. When the place for that conversation was prior to the president deciding he was going to run a reelect.
There is a way in which.
And we'll just go ahead and stop there. She's just another Democrat shill. But the point that I want to get across is that Joe Biden has already decreased 11 points just in the month of October alone. And that is directly related to Israel and Palestine. We cannot pretend like it's related to something else. It is not. We know exactly what's happening here. And we do also have to remember that a large number of young voters in Georgia did come out to support Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. Will that be the same this time around? I honestly don't think that it will be. He is now seen as Genocide Joe. It is what it is. You can't get up there and talk to the American people and give this address and say that, well, we got to stop Hamas, but not all Palestinian people are a part of Hamas, and we got to protect the civilians. And we see every day on social media that Israel is committing war crimes against the Palestinian people. One of those includes white phosphorus, which is illegal. You are not supposed to use that in war. That is a war crime. It is extremely toxic towards the people. The goal is to eradicate the people from Gaza, and to eventually they're going to move back to the West Bank too, to eradicate those people as well. We'll get into all of that later on. But Joe Biden has a problem.